Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Mel Underbaki, Deputy Executive Director of the Coalition for Civil Freedoms. Our focus traditionally has been political prisoners who have been unjustly targeted in the war on terror, and these people have largely been Muslims. And this is our 32nd webinar, and today's webinar is a little bit different. The title is FBI Entrapment Beyond Muslims, the Kansas Militia Case. We will be revisiting the tragic case of the Fort Dix Five, where 4 innocent Muslim men were where they were entrapped by the FBI and sentenced to life in prison. And another man was sentenced to 35 years. So was the Kansas bomb militia case also an FBI entrapment? We have 4 excellent panelists today. We have Attorney Jim Pratt, a defense lawyer in the Kansas militia case. Also Huma Yasin, also an attorney and an author who is writing a book about the Fort Dix Five case. And we also have 2 family members of one of the defendants in the case. We have Hattie Stein and Alicia Berzins. And thank you all for being here. So Jim Pratt represented Patrick Stein in the Kansas case. Jim has been defending people over 20 years, successfully defending federal criminal cases ranging from drug conspiracies to complex wire, mail fraud, and money laundering cases. And importantly, he has seen how criminal charges affect not only the person charged, but also their families and loved ones. So Jim, I'd like to start with you so you could give us an overview of what happened in Kansas.
Okay, I represented Patrick Stein. I did not represent him alone. I had co-counsel Michael Schultz, excellent attorney, and I was very happy to have him with me on this case. We took the case over about 6 months into it. Because the prior counsel had a conflict and had to get out. So we had read about it in the paper, but until we got into it, we really didn't have all the details. It centered around an FBI informant named Dan Day. And I'm going to be sort of careful because I've got to protect attorney-client privilege, but almost everything came out in court. It started with a flyer at the Garden City Library that allegedly was a recruitment flyer for ISIS. And this was reported in the paper. It sort of went through the community and the FBI investigated. The 2 FBI agents from Garden City, Western Kansas. Dan Day was one of the people that they interviewed, and he had been linked to it several times by other people. After Dan was interviewed, he went to the FBI office to correct some of his statements. And we believe it was about that point where he became a confidential informant for the FBI, dealing mostly with militias. He was involved in another militia that Patrick and the others were not, and he reported the leader of that militia to the FBI, and they opened a domestic terrorism file on that leader about 2 months after after Dan Day got involved with the FBI. About 2 months later, Dan Day met Patrick at a training session, and apparently he went to the FBI and said, "Hey, look, Patrick Stein's a lot angrier than this other guy. Maybe we should look at him." And so 2 months after Dan Day met Patrick, the FBI opened its own domestic terrorism file on Patrick and some of the others involved in the case. Really, there wasn't much going on. They had one recording from April 2016 in which in which they were talking about and I'm going to get the name wrong, uh, Constitutional Restoration Committee or something. It had to do with amending the Constitution through um, the Article 5 conventions. And this was something that they were really excited about. A man named Ernest Lee sort of led the charge on this, and they had met to talk about it, and Dan Day recorded that meeting. The only mention of Muslims in that meeting came from Dan Day when he tried to get Patrick to talk about Muslims. Patrick kind of blew it off, and they went back to focusing on this Article 5 convention and what might happen when the articles were presented to Congress. There was a lot of thought about the government would respond violently or with arms, and there were talks about being in Western Kansas and how it would move east, but that was really all of it. Then the Pulse nightclub shooting occurred, and 2 days after that, there was a meeting in a field in central Kansas. Dan Day, Patrick, and believe 2 other people, Curtis Allen, who was also charged, came after the meeting. And there was a recording that was played in court of that meeting. There was a lot of discussion about that meeting in court, but it was a group of people who were very upset about immigration and what they saw as President Obama letting refugees in from Somalia and other countries coming in uninvestigated. Basically, the claim that President Trump made during the election, that these people were just coming in, nobody knows anything about them, and we've got to stop that. There were some very interesting conspiracy theories presented at that meeting, and also there were some ways to get back. It was Dan Day who mentioned this apartment complex in Garden City that he lived near, and he discussed it being the perfect target, and how at one point in time it had been all white people, and then it had been emptied out, and then the Somalian refugees had come in, and he just continued talking about it being the perfect target. And interestingly enough, during that meeting, Dan Day passed out from heat stroke and was taken to the hospital. So what the government says was the real conspiracy happened after Dan Day was taken to the hospital. After that, they started recording more of Zillow calls, which are sort of walkie-talkie phone applications where the militia would get on every night and would discuss what was going on in the country, or discuss meeting and prepping and things like that. But then somehow this group broke off. Curtis Allen, Gavin Wright, and Patrick Stein, along with Dan Day. Somehow they broke off and they started meeting to discuss how to protect their country. And that sort of continued until Dan Day brought an undercover FBI agent in who said, look, I know you're having a lot of trouble, trying to build bombs or whatever they were trying to do. I can help. And that went on for a couple months until Curtis Allen was arrested for a domestic violence case, and his live-in girlfriend at the time said, hey, you guys need to know what's going on, and reported bomb making and a bunch of other stuff. So that really sped up the process. That is why they were only charged with conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction and not attempt to use a weapon of mass destruction, because the FBI operation was supposed to continue for at least another 2 or 3 months when they were arrested. Um, so they wrapped it all up at that point. And that's sort of the overall of it. Dan Day is an interesting figure. He worked a lot of pseudo law enforcement positions. He was a guard at a juvenile detention facility, if I remember correctly. He was a probation officer. And at the time he got involved with the FBI at the very beginning, he was unemployed. And he was paid, I believe he was paid around $15,000 for the arrests of the three, but he had been paid, and I think the number is about $11,000 prior to the arrest, and then he got the arrest bonus. We still don't know what the conviction bonus was. That's something that we were not, information we weren't given. But there were periods of time where Patrick Stein disagreed with Curtis Allen, and Patrick Stein said, look, I'm just done with this. I'm done dealing with these people. I'm tired of Curtis, telling us what to do. And Dan Day would say, look, you need to, stick together for the cause, is one phrase that he used quite often, for the cause. Dan Day was the only one who lived in Garden City. Patrick lived in Wright, Kansas, out of Dodge City, and the other two lived in Liberal. So they're all about an hour away from each other. So Dan Day would continue to report on what was going on at this apartment complex in Garden City. And it was Dan Day's idea to join the refugee organization that was there in Garden City to help these people so he could get inside information. These were all things that Dan Day suggested he do to move this along, not Patrick or any of the others. At one point, Patrick said about getting maps or aerial photography of this apartment complex, and Dan Day didn't have a printer, so he went to the FBI to get it. During trial, I asked Dan Day, well, did you ever try to talk them out of this or say this isn't a good idea or anything like that? And his response was, that was not my job. That was not part of my persona, as he put it. His job, as he understood it, was to help them down the path of what they felt they should do. So that's how he provided the information. That's why he did what he did. The same with the undercover FBI agent who talked about making a bomb for them. I asked, did you ever say this isn't a good idea, or maybe we shouldn't do this, or maybe your efforts are better spent here? And again, he said that was not my job. His job was to get this to a point where they could charge somebody with attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction, not just a conspiracy. Interestingly, they set up a meeting with Patrick. The others decided not to go, where the FBI brought in fully automatic weapons for Patrick to shoot out in the country. And the purpose of this was, and it's in the report and words I'll never forget, to create chargeable offenses. So if they had to arrest, if for some reason they had to arrest them and they couldn't make the weapon of mass destruction case, they would have a case for possession of fully automatic weapons. And the FBI agent admitted on the stand that Patrick Stein possessing the weapons that the FBI gave him to fire that day was an illegal act. And that's why they brought them. So they would have something to charge him with. And that sort of continued throughout the case. They weren't getting anywhere. And when they weren't getting anywhere, it was then decided, okay, we'll bring in somebody who can offer to make the bomb for them. And it just continued.
So this was basically totally FBI driven, then it sounds like.
You know, I've always had a hard time with that.
Mhm.
My opinion, it was more Dan Day driven
Okay.
to give the FBI what he thought the FBI wanted.
Mhm.
There was one tape where the FBI was giving Day instructions and on what to do at this meeting. You know, you need to get, I think it was, you need to get Curtis to say this. And they realized that the tape was recording, and you can hear the female FBI agent say, "Oh shit," as she turned it off. So yeah, I think there was some of that, but the evidence that I've seen, I think it was more of a Dan Day driven than it was FBI driven. Certainly this is what we need. You need to get this. You need to get this. And then he went out and got it. But,
Okay.
you know, he's the one um, who came up with the idea of the apartments, not the FBI. He testified, I believe it was his idea because it was close to where he lived. And then the FBI tried to say it wasn't his idea because it's a place that Patrick knew about before. They had the militias had done surveillance on this at one point because they felt that there was drug trafficking, and there was even theories. And Patrick never, got into these theories, but the first militia did, that they may have been trafficking in babies and things like that. This Somalian grocery store and the apartment complex. And so they did surveillance, and Patrick was with them on one of those. And Dan Day took him to this apartment. Dan Day was showing him where they would be doing surveillance because Patrick was not familiar with Garden City.
Okay.
So, my theory, and in my closing, talked about Dan Day being a pseudo police officer and sort of finally got to live those dreams when he became a paid confidential informant for the FBI. Unfortunately, the FBI does not record their conversations with confidential informants. We only had that one snippet. So it's hard to tell, was it the FBI pushing it, or was it Dan Day giving them what they thought he wanted? I mean, he talked Patrick out of believing this several times.
Yeah, okay. One of the two, though. Yeah, thank you very much. What was the conviction and the sentence?
The conviction, he was convicted of conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction and was sentenced to 30 years. We were able to get a couple charges dismissed, possession of a firearm and furtherance of a crime of violence. He had 2 charges for that, and we got those dismissed after the prosecution case.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. That was a good overview there. I'm going to next turn to Huma Yasin. Huma is a lawyer, a writer, an activist, an avid vegetable gardener, a wife, a mother of 4 humans and 25 chickens. So much of her writing focuses on the intersectionality of religion, law, and politics. And her forthcoming nonfiction is entitled Conspiracy, the True Story of the Fort Dix Five. And she's also published numerous articles.
Oh, no, it's okay. Well, let's just talk. Don't worry about that stuff.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, though. I appreciate the introduction. Did you have a specific question for me, or did you want me to just jump in?
If you could, the Fort Dix Five, I think, is an important point here. And if you could give us an overview of that. And I also was going to mention the article that you wrote in 2018 that, is the for or against, is the FBI foiling terrorist plots or creating them? So if you'd like to talk about that, that would be great.
Sure. So just, I've done a long webinar on the Fort Dix Five. That's a deep dive, but basically there are 5 men who were convicted of a criminal conspiracy attack the U.S. military at the Fort Dix Five base. I mean, it's not charged like that. That's not the way it's charged, but that's essentially what they were convicted of, criminal conspiracy. And it was a 16-month sting. 2 different informants, one of whom was paid about $250,000 throughout his cooperation. Another of them had admitted to attempting murder in Albania, fleeing illegally into the United States, and agreed to cooperate with the FBI so that he wouldn't be deported and face death in his native country. So they both have, a very pervasive reason to cooperate as informants with the FBI, rather than both financial, immigration, and also criminal clemency in the case of one of the informants. He wasn't charged with the crimes that he had committed. And I mean, just to give you just a broad overview, after going through hundreds of hours of informant-based wiretaps where one or both of the informants are having private conversations with the targets, or the Fort Dix Five, the men in this case, as well as thousands of FISA wiretaps, which is when the government taps your phone, FBI 302s, basically everything. There was not one piece of direct evidence that showed that these men met, they ever discussed a plot, they ever intended to do anything criminal. It's just kind of a cut and paste job where an informant is talking to one party, then he's going and talking to another party, and then he's talking to the other party. And then the informant themselves are interweaving these very distinct and separate conversations to create the facade of a criminal conspiracy. And there were massive, gigantic holes in the investigation. And as Mr. Pratt mentioned, that there are no recordings of the handlers, the FBI agent, and the informants, and that's by design. But every once in a while, you'll catch when one of the informants forgets to flip off their recorder and is actually continuing a recording. And in each of those instances, and there are few, but in each of those instances, you can see that if there's any conspiracy or collaboration or collusion, it's between the FBI agents and their informants, and how they're going to further a plot or a facade of a criminal act. And it certainly happened in the case that I wrote about, and has devastating consequences. I mean, being convicted of a federal crime, especially like this with the terrorism enhancements, it's you're looking at a death behind bars sentence, and it's tragic. It's tragic, and there's multi-generational trauma, and there's community trauma. And, it's terrible. And for what? For what are we doing this? Are we more safe than we were yesterday? No, I would argue that we're less safe. And for what is the FBI doing this? Is this so that they can check a stat, and go in front of Congress and say, hey, we need more money, give us an attaboy and give us, an accolade, and now we have a larger budget? The reality is that there are over 15,000 informants that are crawling around in people's communities. They may or may not be paid. They may or may not have a criminal history for which they are cooperating with the FBI. And that actually outnumbers the amount of agents. So we tend to think of the FBI as like the upper echelon of law enforcement because they're more educated, or there's certain, certain parameters that they meet that exceed, like it's kind of like the Marines for law enforcement. It's like the highest level. But really, I mean, going through documents and evidence, it's like, I don't understand. Like there's a discrepancy in terms of what we expect and what we're getting.
Got unmuted here. Yeah, thank you very much. A good overview there. Maybe go to the Stein family here briefly, and we'll be coming back to you. But as I said, the Kansas case actually had 3 co-defendants, Curtis Allen, Gavin Wright, and Patrick Stein. So we have Patrick's family members here. So Hattie is his mother, and she's been, I'm going to kind of summarize a little bit here. She has worked in she worked for St. John Chemical Dependency Unit since 1992, I believe, and she spent some time doing that and then joined Catholic Charities in 2006 in that same capacity. And she retired in December of 2016 and continues to help her family on the farm. And this picture you see now, that's their family. They're on the farm in Kansas. So I hope she'll tell us a little bit about that in a minute. And Alicia Berzins is one of the 6 children, and she's Patrick's sister. And she's a retired teacher, principal, and a certified master life and holistic health coach. So she's currently living in Arizona. And Hattie and Alicia had read Huma's article. So that's what brought us all together. They contacted the Coalition for Civil Freedoms. And we saw all the similarities between what happened to Patrick Stein and what has happened to many of these people we have advocated for since 2010. So at that time, I went to Wichita for, excuse me, some of the trial, and then I went back for the sentencing. So it's nice to see them again. The last time I saw them was in the courthouse there. And we've got the picture of the family. And Hattie, do you want to start and tell us a little bit about the family and Patrick? Hattie, you're muted. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Good.
Okay. As you can see, we have a large family. Patrick is the 3rd child of 6. And, up until, 2016, we were just pretty much a farming family. We have farmed all of our lives. We live on the Stein family farm in Wright, and Patrick was a part of that, along with his brother. In 2016, probably in the spring of 2016 is when I first realized that Patrick shared with me that he was part of a militia. And I really wasn't too concerned. I've read about militias. There's been militias in Southwest Kansas forever. So I really wasn't that concerned until he began asking some questions that I thought were a little out of character, like what I knew about a grocery store in Dodge City that was being run by the Somalians, and things that he was being told. And I told him, I said, I don't know where you're getting your information, but I said, you might want to check it, because I don't believe that's what's happening. And me working with Catholic Charities, we had several of the Somalian families that were coming in for help and with paperwork, with assistance, and etc. And I was pretty sure that what he was being told was not true. The day I got the call from the FBI, literally, I'm sorry. Turned our family upside down. We had never experienced anything like that. And I came from a family that was very pro-government. I mean, to be honest, my dad worked in the postal department for 40 years. I had a brother that retired out of the Internal Revenue offices. I had a nephew that was a Secret Service during the time of President Reagan. And during that era, all four of my brothers were in the military. We supported law and order. We supported rules and regulations, and we raised our family to abide by them. But also to question if something didn't seem right or sound right or feel right. You always had the right to question the authenticity of the information. Patrick had most of his, well, since he was 15, had struggled with addictions. And so this played, I believe, a part in this also, because that was his weak point, and they certainly played on that really well. But as far as, our family, it took us a few weeks, needless to say, to stabilize, reorganize. There were many phone calls. There were many meetings with attorneys, things that were very foreign to us. And I just want to put in here that we are eternally grateful for Jim Pratt for all the work he did, and not only just for Patrick, but for us as a family, and how important that was for us. Just want to put that in there because that's really important. You don't find that in too many attorneys, that's what I've been told, at least. I don't have a whole lot of experience with that, but I do believe them. And but as far as our family, like I say, it it really rocked our boat tremendously, and our kids live all over the US, and so it took a while for us to all get on the same page, so to speak. And because there were so many mistruths, the media, I'm not exactly great on media being on my doorstep and being rude. And they were with us, on our doorstep, like immediately. And in our little community, as I think, I don't know whether it was Huma or Jim that was talking about how it affects our community, but the Saturday and Sunday after Patrick was arrested on Friday, they were going door to door in our little small community trying to get information on Patrick and the family and et cetera. And we were getting phone calls. What do we do? They're knocking on our door. And so I just told them that you're going to call your attorney. And that put an end to it. It really did. They left. The newspaper people from Wichita and wherever else they were from stopped bothering us then. And so, there's many components of being a family member of someone that is accused of a devastating crime. And But I'm really proud of my family. We really have a strong bond, maybe because of this. But we support Patrick. We continue to communicate with him, and we will continue to do so for as long as we live.
Thank you, Hattie. That was very, very powerful. As we found a lot of the, you mentioned his drug addiction and the fact that made him vulnerable. We find that in so many cases with the Muslims also. You know, they find somebody that's easy to target. So
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
Mel, if I could, Hattie reminded me of an incident that occurred in this case that I'd like to bring up. Patrick was arrested October of 2016, and in July of 2016, he went to, I believe, a cousin of his who worked for the Dodge City Police Department and talked in general terms of his some of his feelings at this time, and the Somalians and the Muslims and those other issues. That cousin reported that up to the chain of command, and it eventually got to the FBI in July of 2016, and the FBI basically did nothing, did not take that information. At one point, I remember the Huffington Post ridiculed one of the federal public defenders because they said, "Hey, did you ever go and just knock on their door and say, knock it off, knucklehead?" And they had a prime opportunity to intercede in July of 2016, and the FBI did not do it because it didn't fit their timeline of events. So Hattie reminded me of that, and I just wanted to bring that up. There was a question of whether this is more FBI or Dan Day.
Can I just follow up on that? In the Fort Dix Five case, one of the targets in that case, he's the only one, Sardar Tatar, that did not get a life sentence. He actually turned the informant into the FBI. So, I mean, it's almost ludicrous when you see these different patterns emerging. And the question is, what is really at stake here? Is the federal government looking at potential thought crime and creating it into actual crime, manufacturing the crime, and sometimes even poorly manufacturing it, and then getting in front of a jury with fear and terror tactics, which unfortunately works, and getting these convictions. It's awful. Sorry. Okay, now I'm going to mute myself again.
Oh, well, thank you. That was a good comments there. Jim, let me get back to you just a second about Dan Day. I had a question, like a good time to ask it. If you think that he became an informant because the FBI threatened him with false charges, you said he was there to correct something he had told them, or did he just want to be an informant anyway, or was he threatened?
That is really hard to say, because the reports that we received simply said that he came in to correct some information. The FBI agent used, and I used it in my closing, that his information was not exactly accurate. And we played up on this that Michael Schultz actually suggested the term for my closing, that the FBI decided to ride or die with a confidential informant who was not exactly accurate in his statements. So that's all the information we had about it. So we're not sure if there was a threat or if it was a mixture of things. What they were investigating, this sign-up sheet for ISIS at the Garden City Library, didn't seem to me to be a big enough deal to threaten somebody, with prosecution. And I think the pictures that we actually tracked down through investigators, it actually turned out to be a Palestinian flag or something and had nothing to do with ISIS. But from what we were given, it's hard to say.
Okay.
The enthusiasm with which Dan Day participated as a confidential informant makes me believe that perhaps it was more of he wanted to be involved.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, okay,
He
financial.
wanted to be a hero.
And so, Alicia, can we go to you now and see if you have things to add about anything you want to talk about, actually, but if it's effects of the family or how your, anything you want to say about your brother?
Yeah, wow, these are hard things to talk about for sure. I would say the thing that, besides the real trauma that has occurred with our family, is the I guess for me, I started questioning everything because we didn't know Patrick's side of the story. All we knew was what was stated in the press conference with the FBI and what we were reading in the newspapers. To this day, we have not been able to actually speak with Patrick and get his version or his side of the story for him to be able to defend himself to his family. And, Jim, again, has been the one that has really been able to help fill in the gaps for the lack of trust that, we didn't know what the truth was. And so we didn't have experience, nor at that time had we ever thought that the terrorist plots that had been thwarted in the United States were actually plots that were created by the FBI. Never had that ever occurred to us. We fully believed that, oh my gosh, there's more bad guys that they've gotten. Yay. And so we fully believed and supported that. And to then have this happen, and I'm so thankful for Huma's article, because we wouldn't be here today having this conversation without that. It gave me hope that there was another side to the story when I read her story. And it really helped me to put my energy into digging into the Fort Dix Five case so that I could learn what has been evidently occurring for decades in this country. And so I've been a seeker of trying to learn the truth and not, basically shattering core beliefs that I've always had about law enforcement and the history and the beauty of living in this country. Those core beliefs have been shattered. And so, not to mention, the core beliefs and not really knowing when this happens on such a large scale, then how our family is viewed and how people might then be to us because of their beliefs about us as a family and what we've taught, or what our core beliefs are. I mean, so your mind just kind of goes really crazy and you start to question, well, what are the things that I've believed about other people that were caught up in these same things? And so it's definitely been a mirror to me, to really catch myself and not jump to judgment about any cases that I see. I look at every thwarted case, and really everything that the FBI does, I look at it through a very different lens today than I did before. And that lack of trust and that lack of knowing that I can trust and believe what I see and what I hear has probably been the most difficult thing to really navigate, besides the trauma in our family, is not knowing what the truth is. And we see that playing out so much today. And so, you know, I said to my husband the other day, I'm so grateful. You know, I'm always looking for the silver lining and what is the meaning of all of this? And how can I reframe this for myself? Because that's what I do with my clients, is how do we reframe this and figure out, well, what is the bigger purpose here? And I'm, you know, I'm very grateful for learning this and knowing this by having this experience with my brother, because it has prepared me for what we're experiencing here in the United States right now, of being able to look at it through a different lens than I ever would have. And so the destruction of core beliefs and having to start building those back up has really been a turning point for me and the way I view things that I'm seeing in the news. And I have stood by my brother throughout, even not knowing what the truth was, and knowing that not everybody in the family was on the same page. I think that was the biggest challenge in going through this with our family, is because we didn't know what the truth was, and we couldn't ask Patrick. Jim was able to fill in those gaps whenever we were at sentencing. I think sentencing, because all of my siblings were there. And so Jim being able to shed some light so that we can have some compassion, everybody could have some compassion for Patrick, and also hold him responsible for the parts that he needs to be held responsible for. There's no doubt about that, but also having compassion for the manipulation and the exploitation of his vulnerabilities in the case. And so, yeah, it's been really hard, and particularly with us all over the country. We haven't really had the ability to come together as a family and grieve and process and mourn the loss together as a family. We've all had to do it separately. And also, I think, you know, other than it being in the newspapers and on TV, very quietly and selectively with who we allow into our circle to even be a part of that process with us. So not feeling like it's something that you could process and share with everyone, because of, you know, the fear of judgment and, you know, what people are going to believe, and wanting to have some control over what they believe. And of course we don't. Yeah, it's been really challenging, and but, you know, a growth opportunity for sure for our family to learn and see things through a different lens.
Do you mind if I just interject for a moment? I think you brought up some absolutely critical points, and one of them, and I think Hattie mentioned this too, about the media. So the FBI basically has had so many months to prepare their case. And then they come out with a press release, and then they plan their interviews, and the U.S. attorney plans their interviews, and they're prepared, and they have all their allegations. Their allegations, they have not been proven in a court of law. And it's like hook, line, and sinker, everybody just bites on, and everybody is suddenly believes that this is gospel, which it's not. And overnight, families become social pariahs. And it's just so, it's sad, it's devastating, it's hard to watch. And then it's really disgusting. Honestly, there's really no nice way to put it. It's disgusting that this occurs, that there's no defense attorney that's had an opportunity to review and vet all of the claims and come out and proclaim the innocence. I mean, when these press releases go out, there may not even be a counsel appointed or hired in the case. So it's literally, you're just defenseless, and families are just making, are swarmed by media on their doorsteps. What's your comment? You can't go out and check your mail. You can't, go out and do your groceries. And in the case, in my case, like, there was no Uber Eats and all that at that time. And the other thing, which I really appreciate that Alicia talked about, is, this kind of like the curtain falling, the veil falling on what your image is. Like in the Dukas case, they fled communist Yugoslavia and they were ethnically Albanian and ethnic minority in Yugoslavia, in the former Yugoslavia. So they came to the United States with this idea of freedom. Mohammed Shnur is ethnically Palestinian, and he's part of the Palestinian diaspora. Like, they can't go back to their homeland. So, coming to the United States, being in the United States, you have these ideas, we have this ideology, we have this, what I will call a civic religion, that you're taught in school. And you don't realize that this is a religion that takes a lot of faith, because the evidence, shows the other way. And that, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent, but a lot of the folks that we see that are entrapped literally came to the United States seeking what the United States claims that they offer in terms of liberty, and what they received instead was the complete opposite.
I'd like to touch on that a little bit from the white male perspective, and especially the perspective of Patrick, Curtis, and Gavin. This was during the 2016 election, where Donald Trump continually stated that these refugees were coming in unvetted, they were dangerous, they didn't know what was going on, and there was all sorts of other conspiracies. Barack Obama was not going to leave the White House, that Hillary Clinton was going to win even if Donald Trump got more votes. There was a train on a siding in Pratt, Kansas, that they were convinced contained gas that was going to be used on the people, and they even went and investigated it. And so all of these led into that fear. And as I argued at sentencing, the Donald Trump and his campaign normalized that fear for people like Patrick. And then it simply took a confidential informant to come in and sort of push them down the road that these fears would lead them to. And I felt that a big part of this case was the normalization of those views. And that's sort of where I really blame the media and right-wing media. for continually to push those. And I also, to a point, that's where I blame the FBI for not going to them and saying, we've heard this is going on. What is going on? We will be keeping an eye on you. And I think if they had done that, it never would have gotten that far because they wouldn't have had the confidential informant. And interestingly, when the undercover FBI asked Patrick to bring the 300 pounds of fertilizer in, it wasn't the right type of fertilizer to make a bomb. Patrick didn't even know what type of fertilizer it was. He just knew he had 300 pounds of it and thought it would do the trick. And it didn't. And so that's how I feel about this case. I really, not aside from Dan Day and the FBI, conservative media pushing these three to a point where they could be convinced this was the right thing to do. And I talked a lot with Patrick about that in our meetings and those, because I love a good conspiracy theory. You know, Patrick and his first attorney didn't get along very well. And so when I first went into Patrick, one of the first things I asked him about was Jade Helm. Because I love the conspiracy theory where all the Walmarts are connected by tunnels. So we spent 10 minutes talking about that. And, but it helped a little bit about where he was getting his information from. And it was not always the most reliable. So I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're all making really good points. I just wanted to say one thing that I have noticed. I've gone to a few trials and somebody mentioned thought crimes. And I know at this trial, I was at the sentencing, and if I'm remembering right, the prosecutors were going for a life sentence because of the ideology. And to me, that is a thought crime. And I mean, it seems like that's become normalized now, that it's fine to put people in prison forever because they're thinking the wrong things. So anyway, comment on that.
That's true and not true. The sentencing guidelines came out to a life sentence. And that's what the government was pushing for. And the Judge Melgren, who I think is one of our most thoughtful judges, just decided that that is not appropriate in this case. Now, they all received different sentences. Curtis received 25 years. Gavin received 26 because a line to the FBI was tacked on, and Patrick received 30 because the judge felt that he was sort of the main force behind this. And unfortunately, that's because Dan Day made friends with Patrick and not really Curtis or Gavin. So all the recordings, Patrick was on them. They were phone calls with Patrick and Dan. The Zillow calls, Patrick was always on those. And then the meetings, Patrick was on those as well. So that's really why the life sentence was pushed, was because the guidelines came out that way. I don't think it was saying that, they certainly weren't saying that the judge has to go over the guidelines because it was an ideology thing, but that was their part of their argument.
Yeah, and to me, as a non-lawyer, that idea of ideology affects your sentence kind of doesn't seem right to me. And I had a question come in here too. We've been hearing things lately about politicians furthering their careers by backing some of these terrorism cases. And I just wondered if anybody had any comment on that, particularly in the Duca case. And Huma, you?
I'm not sure about that. Maybe someone knows something I don't. I will say that Christopher Christie was the U.S. attorney who his office was responsible for prosecuting it. And right after that, he ran for governor. And then when he ran for the Republican bid, he used this in another case, which is very which might even be worse, honestly. They're all bad. But another terrorism case that his office was responsible for prosecuting, which also involved a confidential informant. He ran on being good on national security, and look at his office. I think the way that you posed the question, what it sounded like people are bringing these cases up as though there was an injustice and then running on that. Did I understand that correctly, Mel?
Oh, no, I think the other way around.
The other way around. Oh, well, Christopher Christie has definitely done that. Yeah.
That's what I was, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess we're sort of, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and my daughter snuck in the room.
Oh,
I have not heard of anyone running based on this case or anything else.
okay. Yeah, all right, thank you. Guess do anybody, we're sort of out of time. We try to keep these to an hour. Just want to say, Hattie and Alicia, I'm really sorry this happened to you, but you are very good spokespeople for your family member. And Huma and Jim, you both are doing wonderful things. So, and I guess at this point, is there any final words? Everybody can take a turn if anybody has something they want to end with.
I would just like to say that I'm very grateful for you, Mel, and for the coalition, for the work that you do. And I plan to become more involved. And I really, I think your work is tremendously valuable. And I want to thank you for that. And you too, Huma.
Yeah, anything else anybody wants to say? We're gonna.
I would just like to say that the one thing that came out of this case is that I got to meet the Steins. They are wonderful people. They've invited me out to their wheat harvest every year, but unfortunately my allergies won't allow me to make it. But it's just been a pleasure meeting them and getting to know them, and Patrick as well.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say one thing as well. Like, I know with CCF, we don't normally highlight, we tend to focus, as you mentioned at the beginning, on the cases involving Muslims, but this is broader. And I really appreciate that you guys shared your story today, and it is very traumatic, and to be able to come out and talk about it, just know that this is a safe space for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just would like to say again, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I just would like to say again, thank you so much to Jim and to Huma. Huma was nice enough to reach out back to me when I read her article on the Fort Dix Five and the similarities in my brother's case. And, she didn't have to do that. I was, a nobody on Twitter, and I don't think I had ever sent anybody a message on Twitter before. And so I didn't know what to expect. And, it's through Huma and her compassion and speaking with me through the chat there that led me to a variety of places, which finally landed me at the coalition. And I'm so grateful, because without that, we wouldn't have a full picture of really the gravity of what has been happening for a long time. And it's nice to have that perspective, and also to know that we're not alone. And because we felt very alone.
Yeah.
Very alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for your comments there. Yeah. I guess we'll wrap it up if I have nothing else. I want to talk a little bit about what people can do. One thing we talk about the other cases, we have 31 other webinars, and those are available to watch on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. And this one will be on our Facebook page and YouTube channel also. So please, those of you who are watching, and anybody, share it when it gets up. And I hope if people are not on our mailing list, please join it. Just go to, you can actually do that on our Facebook page also. And we have an action going right now for another case. The Newburgh sting was another really horrifying entrapment case. And our legal department led by Kathy Manley is filing for compassionate release for 3 of the men. And there is, we have a petition to sign and we're looking for letters from people that know them. I'm going to put it in the chat, link to the, if I can figure out how to do that. Okay, so here's the link to that petition. And again, that was our recent webinar was the Newburgh sting, how the FBI entrapped 4 Black men. So please go and watch that. And Hattie, Alicia, Jim, and Huma, I'm really glad you all were able to make it. I think you were very eloquent, all of you. So thank you very much. And people watching us, thank you for joining us. And, we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Mel.